Welcome back. Next up, we're going to focus on prompt design or prompt engineering, a really important part of working with any of these APIs, not even just the OpenAI ones, but really any AI tool. Things are so much more open-ended than really any other API that I have ever worked with, where normally things are broken up and structured in a very precise way, right? If you want to get a list of cities from some cities API, you're probably going to request /cities, and then if you want it as JSON, maybe there's some JSON version versus some other version like XML. There's different endpoints that you request, and there's no flexibility whatsoever. But that is not the case here. There's so many possibilities for what we can use these APIs for, but there's also no rules really. There's no structure in place, which means it helps to have some personal guidelines when structuring your own prompts. So some of the key principles here are mostly taken from the OpenAI documentation, some blog posts that they've written. There's also a great GitHub repo that has tons of information about prompt design. I'll include a link to that along with this video. But here are some key points to keep in mind. When you're designing a prompt, you want to include the actual instructions, of course, any data if necessary, so any input data that you're providing, and then also output instructions. What type of output do you want? What format should it be in? Is it a comma-separated list? Is it a JSON output? Is it just a single word that you want? Is it some sort of output that's optimized to work with Python or with JavaScript? Is it a paragraph of text? Is it a table? There's lots of different ways that we can specify what we want OpenAI to give us, or what we want GPT-4, GPT 3.5 to return to us as the output. So I'm going to spend a couple videos showing some examples. And the first part I'll talk about is just the main instructions you provide. When we're writing a prompt, we want to provide clear instructions. So here's a simple example. Complete the sentence. That's our instruction. And then we have our context or our data that we're asking it to work on. Humans are. I'm going to use the playground here just to make our life a bit easier instead of doing this in a notebook and having to send requests, and I might get a rate limit issue. The API has been sort of down and buggy today anyway. So the playground, I've shown it before, but if you're on the OpenAI page or the dashboard when you're signed in, you'll have an option to go to playground. And then here we can select if we want to use chat, or I'm just going to stick with complete, the model, Text DaVinci 03. And I won't touch anything else for now. So if I just ask it, humans are, I'll zoom in a bit, right? I'm not providing instructions. It's still going to try and complete this and give me some output, but I haven't said what I want it to do, right? So it just continues on and on and on. Humans are social creatures who have an innate need to interact with one another. Tell that to my dad. He's the most loner person on earth. They crave companionship and need to establish relationships, blah, 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 right? It just keeps going. So I guess it did complete the sentence, and then it just kept going. So by providing a simple set of instructions up top, or I can do it below and say, complete the above sentence, but I'll say complete the sentence. That's my instructions, and then this is the actual context. There we are. It completed the sentence. Humans are the most intelligent species on Earth. Of course, I could change this in so many ways. One thing to note when you're using the playground, when you have a completion done, that is considered text that's in the file or it's in the editor. So if I click submit now, it's not going to really complete anything because the sentence was already completed. So I need to delete that if I want it to go again. But of course, there's many other things I could do. Instead of complete the sentence, I could say, count the words below. I mean, that's kind of a terrible use for this, but it should work, right? It gives me 2 words. And I guess my point here is these instructions are important. Instead of just asking it to complete something and assuming it will know what you mean when you say humans are and relying on it just continuing on and rambling essentially, we can finely tune exactly what sort of response we get by telling it, count the words below, complete the sentence below, make a poem with the sentence below, analyze the sentiment, There's a million things you can do, but providing some sort of instruction is usually really, really important. Something that I found to be less important, however, the docs do recommend, is using a separator to designate your instructions and then any input or context or data. So they recommend on the OpenAI documentation using 3 pound symbols, octothorpes, whatever you call these, or using triple quotes, something to separate out the instruction versus the rest of the text. Like I said, I haven't found this necessarily to be that important in my experience. I feel like it's way more important to provide good instructions and then to provide this third piece we're going to talk about soon, output instructions. But it's something that I guess you should know about, and it can help clean up your prompts if nothing else. Right, so we can try an example here. I don't think we'll see anything different if I just wrote translate the following to, well, I guess we'll just keep going with French. And we don't even have to do this where we write text, but this can be helpful at times when you have more complicated information you want to provide. You could have, tons of instructions, and then finally you can say, here's your data, or here's the text I want you to work on. And then in here we'll say, I really like to eat, what do we like to eat? I really like to eat candy. Okay. So I think this will work just fine without separating this out. In fact, I'm positive it's going to work. There we are. J'aime vraiment manger des bonbons, something like that. But if you were to follow the format specified by the docs, it would look like this. Or we can use the pound symbols. I don't think it will make any impact, and we get the exact same output as you can see there. So just a simple tip, I guess, if you even want to call that a tip. It's more of just passing on some advice from the documentation, although I have found that to be not that critical to actually write out instruction. Another thing that's very important is to reduce any fluffy or imprecise language. Try and be as direct and precise as possible. So this prompt is asking for basically a simple explanation of the role of the Supreme Court in U.S. politics. And one way of doing that would be, write me a simple explanation of the role of the Supreme Court in U.S. politics. But this is pretty fuzzy. What is a simple explanation? Or what if I said something like a short, simple explanation? It's going to work. I'll get something. But generally, it's better to be as specific as you can. How many sentences? What makes it simple? Is it simple because it's dumbed down to a lower skill level? Is it simple because it's brief? Does it use, small words and assume no prior knowledge of the Supreme Court or of U.S. politics? It's generally better to do something like, write me a 2 to 3 sentence explanation of the role of the Supreme Court in U.S. politics, geared towards someone with, no prior knowledge of U.S. politics, or something like that. And it should work just fine. Right? It's the highest court in the country, serves the ultimate legal authority. It's responsible for interpreting the laws. This gave me 2 sentences, right? I asked for 2 to 3 and it gave me 2. I'm just being very direct and specific. And it's not like, in our previous example that it wasn't working at all. I can't, let's see if I undo here. Nope, it won't let me undo for some reason. But our previous example, where our prompt was working fine, it just was imprecise. It was fuzzy. It's always better to be very specific and direct. Even if that means some extra tokens in the prompt, it's really not that big of a deal if you're writing an extra sentence or 2 in your explanation. If you have thousands of extra tokens, explaining your prompt, I would definitely make sure that those are important and that they're making a difference, because otherwise it's going to cost, an extra fraction of a cent every time, and you add that up with thousands and thousands of requests, and that could definitely get expensive. So we have a lot more to talk about around output, but for now, I just want to leave those 3 tips there. Be precise and be direct. This one, maybe it works. I haven't noticed it to be that important, but if you're ever getting, a confused response or one that seems like it's mixing up the instructions, you can actually annotate your prompt and say, this is your instruction using something like 3-pound symbols. And then, of course, most important is actually providing some clear instruction. And we'll see a lot more examples of this. We can do sentiment analysis. We can do summarization. We can ask it to pull out keywords. We can ask it, to do math, although it's not terribly great at that. We can. We have all sorts of things we can provide in the instructions. What's important is to actually provide an instruction instead of just assuming it's going to figure out, what to do. All right. One of the most important pieces of designing a good prompt is specifying output instructions. What type of output do you expect? What format should it be in? How much output should there be? These are all very important questions to ask yourself, and they can make your life a lot easier if you're trying to take the result that we get from, let's say, a GPT completion, and then plug that into a database. You might want to ask for SQL. What if you're trying to plug it into just regular Python code or JavaScript or Ruby or any language? It might be easiest if it's formatted as JSON that you can very easily parse and incorporate. So I'll show some examples. Here we have a prompt that is asking the completion API to extract the place names in the following text. And you can see I've specified the input. Here's the instructions. The input is like the first paragraph of Airbnb's Wikipedia page. And then I specify a desired format. And this desired format says, I want it to look like this. The result you give me should say places and then have a comma-separated list of places. And you don't have to do this using this exact syntax, although this is an easy way to suggest the format that we want. Another option would be to show an example, actually make a comma-separated list of places, but let me show you this in action. So I'm just going to grab some text from, this is the Wikipedia article on Alaska. I'm just going to grab something that has some place names and then plug this into the playground. And I'm just using the playground because it's more visual and less buggy right now when the API is down. But this will also work, of course, in the APIs. And then I'm going to ask it to extract a list of place names from the following input text. And if I just run it like this, and I say, here's your input, let's see what it gives us. Okay, so it's a list, right? But it's a bunch of elements separated by new line characters. So if I actually got this response in as an API call, I would then have a bunch of these new line characters I'd probably need to remove or do something with, not to mention the dashes, dashes, I always mix them up, but those characters there and unnecessary spaces I probably don't want. So visually, if I'm just looking at this, it's easy. This is a great format. Alaska, Texas, California, Montana, Juneau, Sitka, and Anchorage. However, to make it friendlier for plugging into code or into a database or into a CSV file, I can do something like desired format. And we don't have to do it this way. I could just say the format of the output should be X. This is just a nice, simple way of saying it. Desired format. And then I'll say places. If I wanted to give it back to me under the name of places, and then I'll do comma, separated list of names. And let's see how that goes for us. I'm going to delete this. And there we are. We get a comma separated list of names. And if I don't want it to be called places, I just want the list of names. I got to get rid of this. Now it just gives me a comma separated list of names. And I can take this and plug it in easily to a CSV file, for example. And imagine that instead of hard coding this paragraph in, I have like a huge data set, tons of paragraphs of text or tons of comments people have left on, I don't know, my restaurant website or Yelp or Reddit, and I want to extract the place names. And that's just one example. There's a lot you could extract, but let's say I'm doing place names. I would be doing this dynamically in some sort of loop or something where it's repeated on unknown content instead of just hard coding in a paragraph of Alaska. because of course we can just extract those place names ourselves. But I can also say things like, instead of this desired format, maybe I want it to be a JSON array of place names. And let's just see what that does. Okay, so it thinks that I wanted it to give me the name JSON array of place names. So it's not exactly what I want. Let's see if I do it this way. It might think that's part of the desired format. All right, but then it gave me this answer, which I'm not happy about. So I could say down here, answer colon. This is just one approach. And there we are, right? It's no longer saying, here's your answer, and including answer colon. It sees that I've already included that. So then it just fills in the blank. And now I have this perfect JSON array that I'm ready to parse and use immediately in any programming language. Let's try another example. I'll ask it to generate a list of the, let's say, top 5 most populated countries on Earth. And let's just see what it gives me. Okay, so it's a numbered list. And that's what I asked for, just a list of the top 5 most populated countries. But maybe I want to know the populations. So I could also specify with their population. Get rid of, well, it actually just kept going. That's fine. Okay, so it's giving me this result here. Population, colon, and then a numbered list. And that's great to read and look at, but again, working in code, this requires some extra work to actually extract the country name and the population. Not to mention ignoring this, ignoring the numbers, ignoring the dashes, maybe not what we want. So I can do something like this, desired format, and then I'll say maybe we have a lot of choices, but a JSON object with countries, country name as the key and population as the value. Let's see how that goes. Perfect. So you can see it gave me exactly what I asked for, an object where I have the key, the left side, right, is the name of the country, and then their population on the right. And now I could parse this response if I got it, in Python, parse it with json.loads. I'll show an example of that, and immediately have access to the information that I want, and not have to, use regular expressions or split up a string and loop over it. I don't have to do anything. I have the exact shape that I wanted. So it's really important, especially when you're working with code and you're expecting data back from the API that you want to use in your code. It's really important to ask for the shape of that information, to specify what the data should look like when you get it back. So next up, I'm going to show you some common use cases for the completion model. So things like sentiment analysis, summarization, classification. I'll just show some examples. I'll do one per video, so they'll move along pretty quickly. And the first thing I'll show is summarization. So if I grab something from Wikipedia, it doesn't really matter what, but let's do a more complex article on something I don't know much about. How about the Wikipedia page on archaeology? So I'm going to grab maybe just this whole first couple of paragraphs, and then I'm going to go back to using the playground. So here it is, and I'll just plop this in here, and I'll say, here's your input. And then before this, I'll say, summarize the following text, and then I can specify exactly how I want it to do it, but let's just start by saying summarize the following text. Here's your input. And you can see it gives me a summary. Let's see how long it is. It's not too long. I'm not going to read it out loud, but I'll just quickly, yeah, it looks good to me. It's a summary of this first part of the Wikipedia article on archaeology. Now, I could have just asked it to give me a summary of archaeology, but imagine we're doing this dynamically with, reviews on Yelp or posts on Reddit or data that we have from surveys we've done internally at a company or something where we have some data set with thousands of articles or thousands of reviews that we want to summarize. So of course I could shrink this down and say I want it to be summarize following text in 2 to 3 sentences and do something like this. It also is, if you look, it's including the word summary at the beginning. And if I don't want that, I could just start by saying, put your summary here. And that's just an easy way to get only the part that I want. And then I could plug this into a database and not have to worry about it saying summary. I could also do something like desired format up top here, desired format, 2 to 3 sentences of text. And let's see if I just get rid of this. And that way it doesn't include the summary at the beginning either, because I gave it a specific format. So that's one option, one way we can use the completion API. And we also will see later on a much more complex example where we'll actually generate a summary of an entire book, a full novel. And that will require managing price, but also managing the context that we're providing each time through, because the model restricts us to how much text we can provide. So we can't give it the full book at once. We're going to have to chunk the book up into a bunch of small pieces and then provide those individually and then get an overall summary. But that's a later project. It's mostly about cost estimating and figuring out how much something will cost ahead of time. When it's complicated, it's not as straightforward as just saying how many tokens is this or how many characters or words is this, but that's coming up soon. Anyway, that's our first use case, summarization. The next use case for the completion API that I'll show is extracting information from text. So let's say that we have a data set of thousands of reviews for different restaurants, and I want to plug them into into the completion API and figure out what items are served at this restaurant and maybe which ones are mentioned the most in different reviews. I want to save them in a database, but all we have are the overall reviews. So this is one of my favorite restaurants. It's no longer with us. Back when I lived in San Francisco, 20th Century Cafe. It closed, unfortunately, during COVID. But let's just grab, I don't know, one of these reviews. Maybe this review to start. And I'll plug it in here. And I'm going to ask it to extract, I don't know, the food names. Extract the food items from the restaurant review below. Or I could just say from the text below. And then I'll tell it, here's your input. And let's see what it gives us. All right, pierogies and honey cake. And as far as I can tell, those are the two names, or the two food items. The honey cake there was very, very, very good. It's a pain to make. I bought the cookbook and tried to make it myself. Anyway, I miss that restaurant. So this is another situation where I could specify, desired format. And I want it to be a JSON list, or let's call it technically in JSON, it's called an array of food names. And I got to get rid of the output that it already made and try this again. Okay, now it is showing me the text output, which I'm not crazy about. So I'll just trick it. Not really trick it, but I'll say, put your output here. And there we go. We get pierogies and honey cake in an array. And then, of course, I could go and grab another review. And imagine I'm doing this dynamically and have thousands or hundreds of thousands of these reviews in a massive data set. And this one says Russian honey cake, bagels, pastries, coffees, and teas. And then I could build up a list and put them in a database and, keep track of the most mentioned foods or, the most popular items. It's just a very simple use case, but I'm asking it to extract information. So I'm not asking it to summarize. That's what we saw previously. I'm asking it to retrieve specific bits of information. In this case, food items. You could do brand names, names of companies, products, colors. There's a million things you could ask for where you give it a chunk of text and ask it to get information out. And then I'm telling it, here's the format I want. And this would make it very easy to plug that into Python. The next use case for the completion API we'll cover is sentiment analysis. So sentiment analysis basically involves giving an API or some model a piece of text and asking it to tell us if it's a positive sentiment, neutral, or negative. There's other variations where it's not just those three options, but that's the most common. Is this positive, neutral, or negative? And you could use this to analyze the sentiment around different brands or startups and which stocks to buy based on Reddit comments. Or let's do it just on restaurant reviews. So I have the same Google reviews open for this 20th Century Cafe. And let's find one. Let's start with a negative review. I'm sure there's at least one very negative somewhere, no? Okay, how about this review here? 1 star. And I'll bring this into the playground. I'll paste in the review. I'll say, here's your input. And then I'll ask it to classify the following texts. How about the following text's sentiment as, and then I have a choice. Do I just do positive, neutral, or negative? And let's start there. And it says negative. And that makes sense. It's quite a negative review. Let's find a way more positive review. Maybe this one here. Put that in. Of course, you're not going to do this one at a time most of the time. We have a sentiment analysis project later on where we work with Reddit comments. And we're going to, work with hundreds at a time that we're scraping and plugging in. We're not actually manually typing them and copying and pasting. So this one's positive. Let's try one more example. Maybe we'll find a neutral. How about this one here? It's a 3-star review. It says some nice things, some negative things. And yep, it says neutral. All right, so simple example, but that is how we can use the completion API to perform sentiment analysis. There are separate standalone sentiment analysis APIs out there where you send them text and that's all they do. They'll return to you positive, neutral, or negative. You can set it up to work with numbers, but the point is with OpenAI's tools, with GPT and the completion API, it's just this Swiss Army knife where we have to tell it exactly what we want it to do. And it will perform the sentiment analysis for us, assuming we ask it to. We could also, if we wanted to work with numbers instead of positive, neutral, or negative, we could do something like desired format, a number, and let's say -1 for negative, 0 for neutral, and 1 for positive. All right, well, it worked, although, I just want the number. I don't want it to also say neutral. We could try finessing the language here, or what I'll do in the next video is show you another option we have at our disposal. But that's a simple example of sentiment analysis. Next up, we're going to talk about the difference between 0-shot prompting and 1-shot or few-shot prompting. So these terms, few-shot prompting, 1-shot, 0-shot, they have to do with basically how many examples are provided in a given prompt. So the term 0-shot prompting or 0-shot means we're not providing any examples. And we're hoping that the model can just figure out what we want it to do based on the prompt without examples. So extract keywords from the below text, and then we'd have some text in here that we wanted to extract from, and we hope that it can just figure out how to extract the keywords. And a lot of the time that works great. I'd say most of the time with the stuff we've done so far, we don't need examples. But there may be times where we want to try a 1-shot or few-shot approach. It basically just means providing examples that hopefully the model can learn from in our prompt. Now, we're not changing the model. We're not training the model overall. We're simply providing a few examples to illustrate what we want. So here's the same prompt in a few-shot approach. Extract keywords from the corresponding text below. We'll put text down here. It's not there right now. And then we give it an example. Here's our first example, and here's the keywords we would expect to get back. Here's our second example. Here are the keywords we expect to get back. Here's our third. Now you show us the keywords that we should get back, or complete those keywords for us. So this can definitely be helpful. I always start with a zero-shot approach. Again, it's just a fancy way of saying no examples. And then if I'm struggling to get the model to do what I want, at that point, I'll incorporate an example or two. So an example of how we could actually use this is from the previous video. We had this classify the following text sentiment as positive, neutral, or negative. Desired format is unnumbered. I want -1 for negative, 0 for neutral, and 1 for positive. Now we could rewrite the prompt. I could probably change this up here, classify the following text sentiment as -1, 0, or 1 based upon the sentiment in the text or something like that. I could rewrite the text, but I want to show you here that I could also just provide an example or two, and it should be able to figure out the format that I want. Because right now what it's giving me is the number 0, but it's also giving me neutral in the parentheses. So what I could do is this, give it an example. Input, and let's just do a very obviously positive input, like I love you so much. And then we could say that the sentiment should be 1, right? If that's supposed to be positive. And that might illustrate that we want only the number back. So this would be a one-shot example, not a few shot, because we only have one example here. And then if I delete this down here, let's see if that's enough. Now it's just giving me a number. Let's try another review here. And by the way, the number it gave me here was 0. This was our neutral review that was a 3 out of 5 star review, so that tracks. Let's try a very negative review. And put that in here. Okay, just get rid of extra space. And let's see what sort of sentiment it gives this super negative one. Is it going? There we go. -1, which is for negative. So I'm not saying that you should do sentiment analysis this way where we're just generating a number. I wanted to show, though, that we can totally change the way that it gives us output, totally change the format. And if it's not picking up on our text instructions very well, which often is a failing on my part or on the prompt writer's part, we can then include an example or two or more, as many as needed. So this would be a one-shot approach. This is a few shot. I mean, technically it's a 2-shot approach. That just means we're providing one or more examples to show the input and then the output that we expect. And it makes a big difference. As you can see in this case, it's now just giving me a number. It's not doing, negative in parentheses, which I didn't want. Okay, so a lot of the time examples can help. Next, I want to show you something that's kind of interesting. I don't know how useful it is day to day, at least for the prompts that I write, but this is something called chain of thought prompting. So here's a word problem, the type that trips many people up, myself included. Alice is 7 years older than Beth, who is 5 years older than Erica. What is the difference between the ages of Alice and Erica if Erica is 30 years old? So if we were going to solve this, I'll start by just seeing what the playground with the completion model comes up with. It says Alice is 37 years old. The difference is 7 years. Okay, now let's see if that's correct. Just as humans here, we know Erica is 30, right? So let's start with that. Erica is 30. And then we know that Alice is 7 years older than Beth, who is 5 years older than Erica, right? So Beth is 5 years older than Erica, meaning she's 35. And Alice is 7 years older than Beth. So Alice should then be 7 years older than 35, right? Which would be 42. So what is the difference between the ages of Alice and Erica? Alice and Erica, that difference is 12. Not the most complicated problem. However, you can see that it got it wrong. It said Alice is 37. That's not correct. Alice is 42. The difference, according to our completion here, is 7 years, but the true difference should be 12 years. So it got it wrong. And there's many examples of GPT getting things wrong, of course, especially factual information, which we'll also talk about in a bit. But this is not that complicated, and there's actually a very simple trick that we can use to try and coach it along the right path. And there's a whole paper about this, actually. Large language models are zero-shot reasoners. If we look in the abstract here, there's a piece right here. We show that LLMs, large language models, are decent zero-shot reasoners by simply adding "let's think step by step" before each answer. It's pretty fascinating. If I simply add in "let's think step by step" and I submit this, this is what we get. Remember last time it told me the difference was 7 years? Well, now it's telling me the difference between Alice's age and Erica's age is 12 years. Right, so it shows me step by step essentially what it's trying to do. Beth is 5 years older than Erica, so Beth is 30 plus 5. It's exactly what I did, right? Alice is 7 years older than Beth, so Alice is 35 plus 7. And the difference is going to be 42 minus 30, which is 12 years. And that's the correct answer. But we weren't getting it until we put in "let's think step by step." Now, like I said, I don't know how useful this is. I'm not writing many prompts that involve, logical reasoning like you see here, but it's pretty nifty that this works. There's a whole data set of word problems you can find online where you could play around and see if it trips up GPT 3.5 or 4, whichever model you're using. And then if you add in "let's think step by step," a lot of the time, it's not a guaranteed fix, but a lot of the time it will get the right answer if it wasn't getting it before. It's pretty fascinating. So we're almost done with this section on prompt design or prompt engineering. I just want to show one more example or a use case for the text completion API. So we've already seen summarization. What else have we seen? Sentiment analysis, keyword extraction. Next, we're going to talk about transformation. So transformation just means taking input text and transforming it to some sort of output. Often, by far the most common example would be translating from one language to the next. So we can do that. And I've already shown some of this, but why don't we do a more complex translation? Translate the following text to Spanish, French, and how about, why don't we do Japanese? Okay. And then I'll give it some text and we'll do something very simple like, "My favorite color is purple," just to keep it simple. Okay, so when I submit this, it's going to transform each one of those, hopefully. "Mi color favorite," I don't really speak Spanish, "es morado, ma couleur préférée." Is that how you say purple in French? Apparently it is. And let's try the Japanese. And according to Google Translate, that's correct in Japanese. Although, of course, I could have just plugged that back into the model and asked it to translate Japanese to English, and we could test it that way. And just to circle back to something we've already seen, I could specify I wanted to give it these 3 pairs back to me, not just as text, but maybe in JSON format. Translate, how about the output should be a JSON object. Maybe I want to plug this in to a database somewhere. Let's get rid of that. And there we go. It gives me an object where Spanish is set to the correct translation, French is set to the French translation, Japanese is set to the Japanese translation. And of course, you could pass more text in there, but I'll show another example. We can transform text in many other ways. So one of the examples on the OpenAI documentation is to take first-person text, like, "I love to ski so much, and today I went skiing with my best friends, and I fell really hard and broke 34 bones. I cried for hours. Now I am almost dead." All right. So we've got some first-person speech or text, and we'll say, "Transform the following text from first person." We might not even need to say from first person. We'll just say to third person. like that. Let's see what it does. He loves to ski so much. Today he went skiing with his best friends and he fell really hard and broke 34 bones. He cried for hours. Now he is almost dead. And I could rewrite it to say, third person female, for example. She loves to ski so much. What about if I try and change the tense? Transform the following text to third person female in the future tense. She will love skiing so much in the future. Today she went skiing with her best friends and she fell really hard and broke 34 bones. She will cry for hours. Now she will be almost dead. So, it tried. I've never done that with the tense, and I made it hard because it says today, right? And now. So it's kind of hard to turn those words into future tense without completely removing those words, right? Anyway, just a silly example, but that's another way we can transform text from one format to another. So we can translate languages, we can change, perspectives. What do you call it? First person, second person, third person. I don't know what you call that. But we can also do things like kind of fun examples, transform each. Let's do movie title to emojis. Let's see if we can do the movie Cocaine Bear. Let's see. Yeah, that's pretty good for Cocaine Bear, right? So it's transforming text in another way. Let's try one more. How about the Lion King? Should be an easy one. Yeah, pretty good. All right, so another way of transforming text. There's a lot of things you can do, and that's pretty much it.